In 1867, a railway connected a port to an interior plateau.
It was built so coffee could come down. What it changed was who went up.
Things you've never seen now revealed.
This is how the world
Every
moves.
freight railway has a problem no engineer can solve. The train only earns money in one direction. It runs down loaded to the port, unloads, and then has to come back. Coming back empty costs almost exactly what coming back full costs. Same locomotive, same fuel, same track, same crew. That empty return is the most under-discussed force in the history of transport, and this is a story about what filled one of them. In 1867, a railway line opened between a seaport and a plateau town, roughly 100 kilometers inland, built by a company under English control with a single stated purpose: move coffee out of the interior and onto ships. The most lasting consequence of that line was not what it carried downhill. It was what came back up.
Before the consequence, the structure, because it is remarkable on its own. Between that port and the plateau stands a coastal escarpment that rises hundreds of meters over a horizontal distance far too short for any ordinary gradient. No conventional locomotive climbs that by friction alone. The solution was a series of inclined planes worked by stationary engines and cable, and later a rack system, a toothed rail between the running rails, gear meeting gear. That is an engineering decision that tells you a great deal about the priorities of the period. It was considered more reasonable to invent a way of climbing an escarpment than to accept that coffee would keep descending on the backs of animals. The line changed the price of everything that crossed it, and it is worth saying what existed before, so the comparison lands. Coffee descended on mule trains, taking days over the same stretch the railway would cover in hours. Each animal carried a fraction of what one wagon holds. When the difference between two means of transport is of that order, it is not an improvement. It is a different economy altogether.
Now, the economic mechanism, which is the heart of this episode. In logistics, there is a name for the empty train problem: backhaul. When the outbound leg already covers the cost of the operation, anything that fills the return travels at a very low marginal cost, essentially the price of loading it. Which means the coffee railway created, without planning to, the cheapest overland transport in the country in the direction of port to interior. And cheap transport heading inland has one very specific consequence. It makes moving large numbers of people possible. Before that line, traveling from the coast to the plateau was a journey of days, expensive and risky. After it, it was a train ticket. The infrastructure decided nothing. It simply made one direction affordable that had been prohibitive.
And what filled that return leg has an exact address. Between 1886 and 1887, a large reception building was constructed in a district of the city on the plateau to receive, house, and dispatch newly arrived workers. It was not near the railway by coincidence. It had its own railway station. A branch line of the company unloaded directly inside the grounds. And the detail that summarizes this entire episode sits in one archival sentence. At that branch, immigrants and coffee were both unloaded. Same rails, same yard, same operating hours. One flow heading down to the ships, the other heading up to the plantations, crossing each other inside a shed. Rarely is the economy of a country so physically visible in a single place.
Across 91 years of operation, roughly 2.5 million people passed through that building, from more than 70 nationalities and origins. Hold that number. But before I tell you what it did to the map of the country, you need to know why so many people were brought in, because this part of the story is usually told as half of a story.
On the 13th of May, 1888, slavery was abolished in Brazil. The law ended slavery and provided nothing else. No land, no payment, no compensation, no policy of any kind for the people who had been enslaved. That is documented fact, and it has to be stated plainly, because it explains what follows. The same coffee economy that had operated on enslaved labor began, in the period immediately after, to receive provincial public funds to pay for the passage and housing of foreign workers. The increase in that flow after abolition was itself the stated reason for building a larger reception facility. Two decisions taken almost simultaneously about who would work the same fields. The funding mechanism is documented too, and worth spelling out. Passage was subsidized with provincial public money, and accommodation on arrival was free for the first days. From the point of view of whoever was hiring, that reduced the cost of bringing a worker from another continent to essentially zero. The landowner received a person already transported, already housed, already assigned.
The system that was assembled had clear stages, and every one of them ran on rails. A person disembarked at the port, climbed the escarpment by train, was housed at the reception building for a few days, and registered in a ledger with name, age, origin, and occupation, was assigned a destination, a specific farm in a specific interior municipality, and traveled on by train again, along the same network that ran downhill loaded with coffee. Contracts typically involve travel debt, housing on the property, and payment by volume harvested. This is not the place to idealize that. Many families changed countries to work in hard conditions, in debt before they began, and a portion of them went back. Another portion stayed, bought small plots, moved to cities, opened workshops, and changed the demography of an entire state within one generation.
And the effect on the map is the part least noticed today, because it has become scenery. Towns in that interior rarely appeared where geography suggested. They appeared where the railway stopped. The station determined where commerce sat, where the warehouse was built, where the post office went, and where it was worth opening a school. Entire municipalities exist because a company decided there was enough water and firewood there for a locomotive. When the network later shrank and many branches were closed, those towns did not vanish. They already had lives of their own. They remain as marks of a route nobody can see anymore. A row of urban centers spaced with strange regularity. And that spacing is simply the distance a locomotive of that era could run before it had to stop. And the spacing has an exact technical explanation. A steam locomotive needs water and firewood, and it needs them often. Stops could not be too far apart, or the train would not arrive. It was that mechanical constraint, how far a machine runs before it must refuel, that set the distance between a great many of the towns in that interior. The urban geography of an entire region is, ultimately, the range of a boiler.
It is worth separating what the railway did from what it did not do, because those get blended constantly. It did not create the coffee economy that came first, and it was what financed the rails. It did not decide who would come, that was immigration policy, with public money and explicit criteria. And it did not distribute benefit evenly. Whoever held land near a station watched the value of what they produced move to a different level. And whoever sat 40 kilometers from the line went on selling to a neighbor. What the railway did was narrower and deeper than any of that. It lowered the cost of moving goods and people in a direction that had previously been too expensive. Every time that happens, in any country, in any century, population rearranges itself on top of the new route.
And there is a reading about infrastructure this episode wants to leave behind, because it applies to the present. Transport projects almost never produce the effect written in the justification report. The report speaks of moving harvests, reducing freight costs, increasing exports, measurable, defensible, entirely true things. What such projects actually produce is a change in what is possible. Who can reach where, at what price, in how long, and possibility spreads in directions nobody budgeted for. The people who built that line were solving a coffee problem. They were also, without knowing it, determining where the families of millions of people would live. People who had not yet decided to cross an ocean.
And that is why this channel looks at how the world moves rather than at what it carries. The outbound cargo is what appears on the spreadsheet and what gives the project its name. The return cargo is what changes a country. A railway built so that coffee could reach the sea became the instrument that carried up the escarpment the people the ships had brought, and then drew, station by station, the places where those people would settle. Neither of those was in the plan. Both happened because movement became cheap in a direction where it had been expensive. Infrastructure has no intention, but it has consequence. And consequence outlives intention by a very long margin. And it is worth noticing that the two things this railway changed most appear in no report from the period where people ended up living, and who those people were.
Here's a question to take back to your own city. What exists there because something used to pass nearby? A rail line, a road, a river, a harbor? Tell me in the comments. Because almost every town has that answer and almost nobody thinks about it. If this gave you a new way to read a map, a like helps somebody else find it. And subscribe. Because the next one is about the hardest section of that same line, how you make a train climb an escarpment that no locomotive can climb by friction.